and Professor. My name is Roman Luco, and for this week's flight presentation, we will be discussing the baseball trip scenario. So, for this scenario, once again, this will not be a word by word PowerPoint presentation, but I do want to go over the scenario in detail. So, for this one, me and a friend are planning to make a 200-mile trip to a professional baseball game. Let's just say we're going to see the Tigers since that's my favorite team. Your boss has asked you to drop off a business proposal at the branch office there and has given your company the twin engine to use for the trip. The weather is forecast to be VFR for the flight to and from the baseball game, and I must effectively plan a VFR cross country flight in my multi engine airplane. So far, seems pretty straightforward, a simple trip. And once again, it's going to be a single pilot situation, and so it'll be myself and a passenger. So it's just a couple of things I would like to go over. First off, I'm going to be flying the Diamond DA-40, the DA-42. So this is going to be an aircraft that I'm very familiar with at this point. The route is going to be basically a direct route, and something we're going to have to take into consideration for the route later is going to be TFRs. The duration of the flight is going to be a short flight, approximately an hour flight, and anticipated weather. So the weather is expected to be VFR for the duration of flight. We don't have to be concerned too much about weather except when we get into performance and we're talking about altitudes, and we'll touch on that a little later. So for this flight, we'll just assume that the METAR is basically showing that it's clear. It's going to be standard temperatures, let's say 15 degrees Celsius. In the radar, there's nothing being shown. Another observation you want to look at is PIREPs. So PIREPs are basically pilot reports, and they give you like up-to-date information, and that could be very critical in VFR situations, especially when you're not expecting anything. If a pilot sees something up there, like let's say clear air turbulence, that's something you want to be aware of for your flight. Another thing you want to do as the pilot is not only look at the current weather conditions, but you're going to want to check out the TAFT. So that's going to be the Terra Dome area forecast, and that's just making sure that not only during takeoff, but actually the duration of the flight and through landing to ensure that you're going to have the best weather available for that flight. Another thing you're going to want to look at is winds and temperatures aloft. So, although on the ground the winds and the temperature may be favorable for you, once you get aloft, there may be some variation in the weather. There could be a massive drop in temperature. There could be very strong winds, which aren't going to be favorable to your flight, which could change your flight time or could also change your altitude because you want to pick the best altitude for your flight. Also, with that, you want to utilize a tool through the Aviation Weather Center, which is going to be the graphical aviation forecast. And I use that a lot when I'm planning because the first thing I'm going to do is check the weather. I always check the weather on the news, and then I'll use the graphical aviation forecast because not only will that give me an outlook of how things currently look, but it can also allow me to look for specific details. So if I want to see ceiling levels, icing levels, those are the type of things I can see that'll have me better prepared for my flight. Now, one of the things I considered as soon as I determined the purpose of the flight and where we'll be going is the different airspaces we will be going to. So, as a private pilot, there are limitations as to flying into Bravo airspace. So, most of the time, baseball teams are in major cities. So, in these major cities, you're probably going to have Bravo airspace, Charlie at the minimum. So you need to make sure that I meet the qualifications to not only fly in that airspace, but that I have an option in terms of getting around the airspace. Another thing with that is going to be looking at the VFR charts. The VFR charts are also going to let me know the minimum altitudes and also where those different airspaces begin. as with Bravo Airspace, they say upside down wedding cake, but each airspace is going to be different based on the city. And like I said, once again, that's why it's important to know these charts and also use the VFR charts to pick the best route based on the capabilities of your aircraft and, like I said, the purpose of the flight. Um, the big thing for this is going to be TFR. Um, I live in a major city, so there's a lot of events going on in Las Vegas. So there's always TFRs popping up. So in particular, for baseball games, they don't want you flying over the stadiums for obvious reasons. So I need to make sure that the airport that I'm landing into isn't going to be in a TFR, which is basically a temporarily restricted area. So I need to be aware of what route I need to take and what restrictions are going to be placed on me during that time. So, or I need to also consider arriving earlier before the TFR is in place, and also being making sure I'm communicating with that airspace. So let's say Bravo. Let's make sure I'm communicating with ATC to determine what's going to be the best route or how they can get me to my destination. Another thing I need to consider is based on my aircraft performance. I need to know the runway length. This is a multi-engine aircraft, so I need to make sure that where I'm landing is going to meet the performance standards for my aircraft. So I need to make sure I have enough runway to land on, and I can't forget that I also need to make sure that I meet the go no go standard for my takeoff. Once again, the weather seems to be VFR. We're going to assume that pressure altitude is good for these conditions, but you also want to make sure that you're able to do that. In addition to that, once again, it's going to be a baseball event going on. So ATC could be routing us um, different ways. It could be a possibility that our airport destination airport is closed off. So I need to make sure I have an alternate airport within within our range. It's only 200 nautical miles, so obviously most multi-engine aircrafts are going to be able to meet that distance and get to an alternate with the fuel available. Another thing I need to make sure is that our available nav aids are functioning and working well. If I'm going to be doing this flight via FAR, um, if I'm going to do a route, I also want to make sure that those nav aids, let's say I use a VOR or Vortec, that they're functioning properly, and that's when you go into things like NOTAMs. So obviously, in every situation, you want to use aeronautical decision making. So that would require me to use the PAVE checklist. There's not a lot in this situation that I think is pertinent or maybe even dangerous. Um, Me as the pilot, making sure I use I am safe, the aircraft has the necessary equipment and meets the performance and currency requirements. The environment that includes the airport, um, airport weather, like I said, nav aids, and we discussed that previously. The only thing I would be worried about in terms of that would be a possible TFR since there's going to be a professional baseball game going on. And then external pressures, the passenger and the purpose of the flight. It's a business flight, but there wasn't necessarily a timeline for that. But there may be some pressure on me to get to the game before it starts. So a little bit of get there itis could be a possibility. So as far as risk management, I think my biggest concern in this flight would be that it seems so easy that as a pilot, I may get complacent and have a lack of planning in terms of my alternates and checking my airports, and also in terms of different things involved with planning the flight or just being, like I said, not being aware of my current situation. And that happens a lot with pilots when we talk about easy flights. We think, oh, nothing can go wrong. So this is just a situation, just like any other. It may not be obvious that there's risk involved, but whenever you're flying, especially in a multi engine aircraft, you want to make sure that you manage all risk as well as possible. So my references for this presentation was the Aviation Instructor Handbook, and then the Aviation Weather Center, which is the website aviationweather.gov. And then also I reference the Airplane Flying Handbook. So once again, thank you for watching my presentation, and God bless.